Hi. What I'd like to show off today is something new, something I'm calling MicroVerse. And what MicroVerse is, we're looking at some of the output of it here, is a fully real-time, non-destructive environment workflow for Unity. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, first of all, when you do edits, it's all in real time. There's no baking, there's no buttons to push that bake it down, and then you see the result. It all just happens as you edit it, including all the vegetation you're seeing here, the height maps, the texturing, the spline-based roads and areas. All of it just happens when you work as you work. And secondly, all of it is non-destructive. And by that, I mean that the whole world is essentially computed from the ground up, right from when you start, when you make an edit. And so you can work on this terrain and undo anything. You don't have to bake it down at any point, like carving in a road or something, and then you can't get it back out. It's all fully non-destructive. And that brings actually Unity's tools into a non-destructive workflow as well. For instance, here I have, this is a little example, and we'll get into some more later. Here's a little house, and it has a little area defined for it, and its props. And if I move that, you'll see the terrain just conforms to get out of the way, and so do the trees, and they will all reform around it, however that should be done. So that's an example of the terrain system essentially conforming to the object, but it also goes the other way as well if you wanted to. And that's, the same thing for like these spline roads here. So if I go to, where are my roads? I should be calling them paths because roads are a little more complex than paths. But so if I go to the spline editor and let me find a knot here. Oh, this is a village path. Wrong path. I'm like, why is it not showing up? And if I move this, you'll see that everything conforms to it, the height, the texturing, etc. And the splines themselves can have multiple textures that they assign, basically for an embankment, things like that. They can clear trees out of the way, as they're doing here, and basically handle everything you need to. And again, it's all in real time and with all kinds of nice controls. Same thing for these trees. If I want to come in here and then let's go to my trees. I've got a couple different types here, and I want to get rid of, these trees. I can take the density down, or I can just take the, let's just take the density way down. If I take the density down, you'll get far fewer of them. I can change parameters about them, etc. So yeah, everything updates in real time. No baking and previews. That was kind of like a first tier thing in the design of this. The other thing that's really important was to have kind of a unified framework for how we work with things. And so we can be intrinsically, like this is intrinsically working across multiple terrains. For reference, this is 4 terrains. Each of them are 2K height map, 2K splat map, and I think 1K detail map. So they're hefty terrains of large size. And the system's pretty good about culling things and keeping it optimal so it can work with more terrains than this and still be real time. The other thing I wanted to talk about was fall off. So essentially, a lot of times we want to do things across the whole terrain, like we want to apply snow across the whole terrain or something like that. And that's all fine. We can do that. But there's also fall off areas, and these can be defined a number of different ways. If we're looking at this little forest here, you'll notice that it's got this spline ring around it. So if you have the spline package, then essentially you can define areas using splines, and they can have a nice soft edge fall off, and you can put stamps under there that texture things, that populate things, etc., and they'll all obey that fall off. Now without splines, you can still do that. For instance, over here, this little bit of desert area is defined with a radial fall off. So you have different kinds of fall offs in the system to conform the stamps to those fall offs. And so essentially everything is intrinsically biomeable, right? Like it's not a problem to do biomes because the system is just fundamentally set up that way. And then the third one is really fundamentally set up as a non-destructive editing environment. And, that doesn't mean you're going to never have to adjust anything, right? Like if I take this mountain here, where is this guy? Stamps. And then move him like this, everything adjusts correctly, but now that spline path is cutting through the terrain in a way that we probably don't want a big hole there. And again, like, everything is adjustable and everything works in real time. You can see how the trees just got out of the way. They replanted themselves based on the rules, and it all just updates. You can, have paths join like this one does. There are even 2 different texture types. And I even have a little player here, so if I want to, I can just jump into the game here and test it out. So I think this is a big leap forward versus any traditional terrain building system out there, just because you can see the results right away and make your edits right away, and it all just updates, and there's no baking or previews or anything like that to deal with. And anytime you take something that is takes a little while to do and you convert it into real time, it's just a massive boost to workflow. So yeah, this is getting pretty close to release, so I will submit it pretty soon. It's heavily optimized. There's still some more work I can do there in terms of like updates, but even on a massive scene, I'm getting 15 to 30 frames a second, depending on the GPU, while I'm updating, which is great. So maybe I should show off some of the actual like stamps or some of the more advanced workflows, how I set some things up. So if you've seen a height stamper, you're probably pretty familiar with the height stamp. You basically just give it a height map. I'll have some included, and there's plenty of them on the asset store. And then it has various blend modes, and this fall off type can be set, right, which can be box, but it can also be like range, which is like a circular area. You can define the shape, the like weight of the area with a texture, and then it can also be a spline area. And generally that's how Falloffs work. If we go to the texture layer here, I'll just look at snow, for instance. And let me zoom out so we can really see it. So we've got the snow layer here, and again, it's all live, so we can, scale it up and down. I can apply noise to various things, like if I want to apply noise to the actual layer weight, to like punch holes in it with a whirly noise, or I can use a texture-based noise, or several procedural ones. That's kind of intrinsic throughout the system. And there's a lot of preview stuff too here. So if I do like an FBM noise, or let's do a whirly noise because it's kind of a polka dot thing, and I set the amplitude to something not insane. You can see I can preview the noise here, so I can see like its value on the train if I want, which is really nice when you're trying to size those things for subtlety and see the effect and stuff. But what we're actually using here is we're using a height filter. And so basically what we're saying with this height filter is between 900 and 500 feet, there's going to be snow, and I can preview this as well. So if I want to see, where that's happening. And then I have a smoothing which goes beyond that. So basically 40 meters below 90 meters, so starting at 50 meters, and then 40 meters after 500 meters, it's going to fade off the snow. I have a slope filter, which is set up to place things on the slope. And so you can see where that filter is set up with the visualization. And then angle would be useful for like if you wanted to put more snow on the north facing side or some south facing or something like that. And then the curve is the curvature of the terrain. And if I go ahead and let me just make this a little bigger so I get the slider and move that down, you can see what that does. And then you can see with the overlay what the curvature looks like. And then you also have these like the range of the curvature lets you kind of dial in whether you want the convexity or the cavity of the terrain. And then you have some smoothing amounts. And all of these filters also have the option for noising them up too. So you can apply noise at any level. And then the fall off right now is global, which means that this is only happening or is happening over the whole terrain. If I change that to range, then the actual placement of this modifier, which is down here, is going to matter. And in range mode, basically it's going to use the scale of the object, which right now is 3000. So if I set this a bit smaller, then we can see that this snow is only going to appear in this area, right? I have a separate snow layer to put a little extra on the tops, which is why you still see some snow in the area. But yeah, so that's kind of how Falloffs work. There's the range one, which is basically a cylindrical one. The box one, which again, you can conform to a box. Texture, which lets you assign your own texture, or spline area. I'm just going to set it back to global. So with this, you kind of can create your biomes and everything. And you can get a pretty good real-time texturing going on. The path stuff is interesting. So let me go down to this path here. And this one is set to modify the height map. And then it has a width and a smoothness, which is basically like the fall off for that. So if I set the smoothness wider, it's going to get a slower fall off. It also has this shaping function down here, which lets you kind of control how that embankment curve is. And you can actually assign it noise, which I do on some of the more broken up paths, so that it'll it'll have little stones, but the noise will create this little bits of where the terrain comes through. And so you can see these over on here. There's a little bit of it right there, or no, that's a shadow. I'd have to actually village path here. I think that's village path 2, actually, is it? So, yeah, so I don't know. I'd have to find a spot or tweak it a little bit. But basically the idea is you can use that to kind of let here we go. Let the original terrain come through. So you can see the grass coming through there, and it's kind of like it kind of overgrew the path a little bit. Right now I'm just using Unity's terrain shader, which is like poo. So if I was using MicroSplat, then this would all height blend and it would look pretty sweet. Yeah, this does fully integrate with MicroSplat, of course. And it can work with automatically do the terrain arrays and stuff. The embankment layer lets you set a different texture for, let me just go back to that other path. And we should be around here somewhere. Here we go. The embankment layer here will put a texture on the side here. So it lets you set another texture for the side, not for the path. And then you can also say to clear trees and vegetation, which is usually something you want. And then it will clear the trees and vegetation in that area. So if I don't know, turn this to 20, you can see it gets rid of all the trees within 20 meters. So yeah, so that's, and it's all built on the Unity spline system, which is going to be nice in the future. Right now for 2021, I have a backported version that people can use. But as Unity adds more features to their spline system for things like placing objects along the road, and which they already have, and various other things, then that all just comes free with it. Or if you're using their spline system as like a controller for AIs or anything like that. So I didn't want to introduce a new spline system to the store because that sort of defeats the utility, right? So the way the houses are working is kind of interesting. What they do is they currently use a couple different stamps. They're all a little bit different. But if we look at this one, it uses this stamp, which is a height stamp with no stamp value set to override. And all that means is that the terrain will go wherever this stamp is, right? And so I just build everything on top of this. And then when I move it around, the height map's going to conform to it. And then it also has the stamp here, which is texturing it. And in some cases, these have occlusion stamps, but I don't think this does right now. And the occlusion stamp, let me find one that does. Right here, will let you decide to occlude future effects. So you can basically say, hey, look, stop putting trees in this area, or don't put any grass in this area, detail grass, or like don't texture this area, etc., by including that stamp. So you can kind of stack these to create things. And you might be saying like, well, wait a minute, what if I want to actually like paint my train? I have some really custom area I want to do. You can still do all that. And there's a system for preserving that. And actually just to show that off, I'm going to switch to a scene that has a demo of that. So in the core package, sorry, that's Microsplat. In MicroVerse, in core, it's example. I put one such example. So let's open this guy up. And what we'll see here, this is just the core package. The way this is kind of done is the core package does texturing and height stamping, and then vegetation and splines are sold as separate things. Again, you know, I have my various stamps here. I can move them around, and they'll texture according to the rules, etc. And then when you come in here, here's somewhere I've painted on the terrain. And so what's cool about this is that when I make a little train modification, there's nothing stopping me from moving it, because what you're actually doing is creating a stamp. And so let me just set one of these up from scratch. Make a copy paste stamp here. Where did it make it? Over here. All right. And let's say we're starting with this area, right? And let me make it a little bigger. So there we go. We got a nice big area to paint in or do whatever we want in. And then what I'm going to do is go over to the train. And I'll just paint some sand in here. And you'll notice this is actually an area across a train, which I didn't really choose on purpose, but everything works across terrains is the point. And let me change this to be painting heights. And I'll just paint a little, is it bumping it up? Oh, smooth heights. I know I want raise or lower. So let's just raise something obvious, right? And now we can grab our copy paste stamp here, and we can create what's called a copy object. And this is basically it's saving off that data. And so I can save this wherever I want my project. And now you'll see that if I modify something about the train, it's not going to modify this area. So let's go to our texture layers and let's just turn off snow. And you'll notice right away, you know, it really needs a fall off. So what we can do is go to our copy paste stamp and we can go ahead and add, let's do a range based fall off. And now we have like it falling off in an area, and I can adjust these rain controls to kind of like, you know, control the weight and the scale of that, how quickly it fades off and stuff. So now we've got this copy paste stamp. We can take this somewhere else, which is, I think, really cool. So we can take this over to wherever we want it. And I'm going to lower that a bit. Oh, it's, yeah, the green axis, of course. Oh, yeah, I have to change the mode from max to overwrite, I think, for, there we go. And so now I can actually like place this thing and it's copied whatever we want and it becomes part of the stamping system. So I don't even need to, you know, I can use this as a way to paint an area, but I can also use it as a way to copy an area, move an area around, you know, have areas affect each other. You can even see the stamps affect each other. That's all based on the order in the hierarchy, by the way. So for instance, our texturing is set up like rock comes first, that just goes over everything. And then we do grass. It's kind of like Photoshop layers, right? And the same thing is true for all of these stamps. Essentially, like we evaluate all the height stamps and then we apply them in order. And then we do the same thing for texturing and the same thing for trees, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, so I think this is a really nice way to work. Basically, you can make these like copy paste stamps or little occlusion pad stamps like I had before, and you can sort of work on your area, get it exactly the way you want, but then it's still non-destructive. You can still move that somewhere else on the train if you want, go change the painting, restamp it, everything becomes part of the non-destructive workflow, including all of Unity's tools and any other tool you might have that does stuff to terrain. So yeah, that's basically the system. I'm trying to think of other things I should show off. I'm not trying to get in deep here. I'm just trying to show you kind of the gist of it and how cool it can actually be, because I think this is really cool. And let me just go back to my main scene, which is I think this one. There we go. Yeah, so I'm pretty proud of this. I think it does a really good job. There's still a lot more work that I want to do on it, especially things like having more control over vegetation placement and things like that. Like the way I actually set this up, this is probably worth showing off, because this is kind of the little tricks you find in the system or whatever. So originally I had this really dense tree cover here, and so this turned green because I have this like visualization on the stamp, but the stamp is so large that it's like, I don't know if I should, even have it. But anyway, so what I did to get this effect is I set the density, to 4, which is pretty high. It's set up to occlude other objects and to be occluded by other objects that came before it. So that's the way you can prevent trees from completely intersecting each other. Now there's more work I want to do there to make that system more robust and better. But essentially each of these has a density which sort of controls how often the trees are placed. And then every tree gets a randomization of its height and width. And you can lock those together so they always scale proportionally. You can also set them to size by the weight, so that essentially, like, and I do this a lot in spline-based areas, so that smaller trees will appear along this border area as opposed to the larger trees, right? And then you can also have them, the default is to adjust the density by weight. So when you fall off an area, the number of trees sort of fall off. You can randomize the rotation. You can sink them into the ground a little bit if your pivot's a little off. But what I did for this was I used a noise, okay? I used this whirly noise, which basically makes polka dots. And what that did, let me just go ahead and turn this down, is it created this sort of clustered polka dot landscape, which I think looks pretty good. So I got that kind of looking the way I wanted. And then what I did is the other trees over here, I set up the same noise parameters, but what I did was inverted, let me turn the density, oh, not that many, well, I forget what it was at, I think it was at 1. I inverted the noise by setting its amplitude to be positive instead of negative. I was using negative on this one. And that will flip this noise texture that you see down here. You see how it's flipped? And so then I put in those gaps, I just put this other kind of tree, like it would only grow away from these other trees. And that was a really nice, effective way to create some consistency in the scene. I've also filtered them by height and slope, it looks like. Oh, and by the way, when you're doing trees, you can also filter by texture type. So for instance here, I can say exclude all other textures but grass and grass soil. And those are the two I set up. And I can also like flip this to basically include all the other textures except these. So you can kind of set up those specifications in either direction. Oh yeah, one other thing I should talk about is that all of these stamps and their combinations, you can just prefab them. They hold all the data about the texturing with them. So you never have to set up your terrain with like what textures are going to go on it or what trees are going to go on it. You can actually just have a prefab of, say, this tree setup or even just this one. And because here is where you add the trees or rocks or whatever that you want to include in that, it will actually add them all to the terrain and everything. And that's really powerful because it means that you can set up content packs. And what I hope to do is have other asset store developers set up content packs for this of like, hey, I made all these trees, but here's how you should like use them. You know what I mean? And so we can set up these content packs and then prefab them, and then you just drag it onto your terrain and decide, hey, maybe I want to assign this to a spline area and have the trees be there, or maybe I want to just like use these settings, for texturing over again, and I just prefab all these texture layers and just drop them onto the terrain, right? So very, very fast workflow, especially if you've already created an area using, and gotten a setup that you like. You can just prefab it and then just drag it in. And again, it can be for areas, it can be for the whole terrain, it can be for whatever you want. And the same thing is true of these copy paste stamps and this village, stamp that's right here. Like I can prefab that whole thing, drop it into somewhere, write some little randomization script on maybe which buildings get picked or, whatever. And then basically I've got an instant like town creator where I'm just dropping stuff in and it will like texture and do the paths and the spline roads and everything just happens, right? And then you drop that in and maybe connect the spline road up to another one that's, connecting the towns together or whatever you want. So yeah, I'm really excited about this system. I think it blows everything else away, quite frankly. And I think there's a lot of work I can do extending it and making it better and coming up with like cool techniques for how vegetation should be populated or how other content can be added into the system, like having modifiers that spawn game objects and things that you might want to interact with, puts apples under the trees, whatever. So yeah, and again, this integrates with Microsplat and Tracks and all that, and and it's very simple integration. It does change the workflow a little bit. You have to like repack the terrain tiles a little bit, I kind of like this area. I put this little extra bit of grass on top of things here with another stamp that's just like localized to this area and. Threw down some desert and stuff. And all this will ship with the bundle and be available for people. These are all assets that I've recycled from Unity demos, so we're allowed to include them in our assets. I did rewrite all the shaders so they'll work across all SRPs using better shaders. And so what I'm going to probably do is include this in the bundle and then also depending on the file size, it might be a bit big. If it's a bit big, I won't include it in the bundle, and I'll put it online in a GitHub repository that people can pull down and play with this actual scene and see how I put it together and everything. So I could probably talk about this for another 4 hours, but I think this is a pretty good start. I'll be making more focused videos in the future. I just kind of wanted to get this out there, have people see it, and start getting excited for it because it's coming soon. Thanks.